Villains are just heroes who got hurt first. Welcome to Mindset Talk No Jutsu, where anime meets discipline, where pressure becomes power, and where we sharpen the mind like a blade. I'm your host, Keetrick, and if you're here, you're not just listening, you're training. Every episode, we break down characters, moments, and philosophies, not just to watch them grow, but to force ourselves to grow. So if you're building something, if you're rebuilding yourself, if life just applied pressure and you refuse to fold, you're in the right place. All right, let's enter the training ground. Before he was Pain, he was Nagato, a war orphan hiding in the reign of Amagakure, a child who accidentally awakened the Rinnegan out of fear when Shinobi invaded his home. A student sitting in front of Jiraiya learning ninjutsu with wide eyes and real hope, believing that maybe, just maybe, the cycle of hatred could end in his lifetime. Nagato didn't dream of domination. He didn't crave destruction. He wasn't obsessed with control. He wanted safety. He wanted the violence to stop. He wanted a world where children didn't grow up the way that he did, scared, hungry, and surrounded by war. He and Yahiko built the original Akatsuki on an ideal. Not terrorism, not conquest. Peace. They believed peace could be built through connection, through shared understanding, through courage, without cruelty. They believed if they endured enough suffering, they could prevent others from having to. That's what we forgot about villains. They rarely begin with hatred. They begin with heartbreak. They begin sensitive, hopeful. They begin believing the world can be better than what they experienced. And when that hope gets crushed, when trust gets betrayed, when the world proves harsher than your ideals, something hard forms in its place. Conviction can turn rigid, protection can turn into control, and pain can turn into identity. Nagato didn't wake up one day wanting to destroy villages. He adapted to survive a world that just kept taking from him. So here's the real question. Who were you before life taught you to armor up? Before disappointment made you colder? Before betrayal made you guarded? And before responsibility made you serious? Who were you before survival became your personality? Because somewhere inside every hardened mindset is a younger version of you that once believed in something softer. And the moment we forget that version is the moment we start justifying becoming someone we never intended to be. Training doesn't just mean building strength. Sometimes it means remembering who you were before the world convinced you strength had to look like steel. Today, we will get into that, mine's and yours. Let's enter the training ground. The wound that changed everything. Yahiko dies. Hanzo forces an impossible choice. Yahiko sacrifices himself to protect Nagato and Konan, and Nagato is left holding his best friend's lifeless body in the rain. That moment doesn't just create grief, it creates disillusionment. Nagato doesn't just lose a friend, he loses faith. Faith in diplomacy, faith in mercy, faith in the idea that goodness is enough. Up until that moment, he believed pain could be endured without becoming it. But when Yahiko dies, something fractures, deeper than emotion. Trust fractures. And when trust breaks, it doesn't just hurt, it rewrites how you see the world. And when he summons the ghetto statue in his rage, you can see the shift. Grief turns into ideology. Pain is born in that rain. Not because Nagato wanted destruction, but because he couldn't survive watching hope die twice. And here's where this gets real. Sometimes the wound isn't war. Sometimes it's betrayal. Sometimes it's loving someone fully and discovering that loyalty wasn't mutual. Sometimes it's building a life with someone and watching that foundation crack in the way you never saw coming. That kind of wound doesn't just hurt, it alters perception. It makes you question your judgment, your discernment, your ability to trust again. And if you're not careful, it can make you cold in places that used to be warm. Disillusionment is more dangerous than anger. Anger burns hot and fades. Disillusionment freezes. And frozen hearts build rigid philosophies like, never again. People can't be trusted. Love is conditional. I'll never be caught off guard like that again. Those sentences feel protective, but they're defensive architecture. They're emotional bunkers. So here's the question for you. What wound changed the way you see relationships? What moment made you rewrite internal rules about trust? Was it betrayal, abandonment, disrespect, infidelity, divorce? And more importantly, did you process the wound? Or did you build a philosophy around it? Because there's a difference. One heals, the other hardens. And hardened hearts don't just keep pain out, they keep connection out too. So I want you to do something. Hold on to that moment. Don't run from it. Don't intellectualize it. Don't minimize it. Hold on to it, because we're not going to pretend it didn't happen. We're going to open up that wound, and we're going to start healing it today as we dive deeper into this episode. Hurt people hurt people. Years later, Pain stands over the Hidden Leaf village and declares that the world will only understand peace through shared suffering. Then he proves it. He invades Konoha, levels it with Shimura Tensei, kills Kakashi, pins Naruto down, speaks calmly about pain as if it's curriculum. Not emotional, not chaotic, but measured. When he rises into the sky and says, Shinra Tensei, and the entire village is flattened in one gravitational pulse, that isn't rage, that's ideology weaponized. He genuinely believes he is right. And that's what makes it terrifying. He's not lashing out, he's executing a philosophy. When wounds go unhealed long enough, people stop seeing their behavior as revenge. They see it as justice. Pain thought destruction would teach empathy. If everyone feels what I felt, they'll understand. But trauma doesn't create empathy. It creates more trauma. It creates fear, defensiveness. It creates more people who are now justified in their retaliation. And cycles repeat when pain becomes policy. When this is what happened to me becomes this is what you deserve, let's bring it home. How many times in real life do we justify harshness as discipline? How often do we say, they need to feel what I felt? They'll learn the hard way like I did. Life isn't soft, so I can't be soft. Is that strength? Or is that unresolved hurt speaking with authority? Because sometimes we're not correcting people. We're punishing them for someone else's mistake. Sometimes the edge in our voice isn't leadership. It's residue. So here's the real question. Where in your life have you been delivering consequences that are actually coming from old pain? Is it in your tone, your distance, sarcasm, emotional withdrawal, overreactions? Hurt people hurt people. Not always loudly, sometimes subtly, sometimes strategically, sometimes in ways that look justified on the surface. But heal people interrupt the pattern. And here's the first step of healing: ownership. Not blame, ownership. The moment you stop saying, this is just how I am, and start saying, this is where I was, that shift changes everything. Because when you can name the wound, you stop weaponizing it unconsciously. Pain couldn't interrupt the cycle because he believed that the pain made him right. Healing begins when you question whether your pain is driving your behavior quietly or justifying it, or finally giving you awareness to recognize your patterns and choose differently than you did before. And that takes humility. It takes courage to admit, I may be protecting myself, but I might also be perpetuating something. Training isn't about pretending you're above the cycle. It's about having the awareness to step out of it. Hurt people hurt people, but heal people choose differently. The question is, which one are you practicing today? Ownership. Before I go further, I need to be clear. This episode, it's personal. And this is not about blaming anyone. This is about acknowledging the parts of me that were still shaped by old loss. There's a difference between accusation and awareness. Accusation points outward. Awareness turns inward. As I've been creating these episodes, something unexpected happened. Some of the lessons I'm teaching started teaching me. Some of the wounds that I thought were healed weren't gone. They were just quiet. And quiet wounds are dangerous because they don't disrupt your productivity. They don't stop your ambition. They don't prevent you from showing up. They just subtly influence how you interpret situations. There's a difference between being functional and being free. You can be high-performing, responsible, committed, married, and still have old narratives running underneath. Narratives like, don't trust too deeply, stay prepared, detach first. Nagato was powerful long before he was healed. He mastered the Rinnegan, controlled the 6 paths of pain, led the Akatsuki. But power didn't mean peace. He could control gravity, but not his grief. That's the concept for this episode. Control power, it's not healed power. You can be disciplined and still defensive, strong and still scared, capable and still carrying. Functionality is not freedom, and growth requires honesty. Now here's step 2 of the healing. Radical self-responsibility. Not taking the blame for what happened to you, but taking responsibility for how it's showing up through you. That's different. I'm not responsible for past betrayal, but I am responsible if the betrayal turns into emotional distance in my present. I'm not responsible for someone else's choices, but I am responsible for whether I let those choices define my identity. Nagato didn't choose war as a child, but he chose how he responded to it as a man. That's where healing lives, in the choice. Step 1 was ownership, recognizing the wound. Step 2, responsibility, recognizing your current participation in the pattern. And that takes maturity, because it's easier to say, this is what happened to me. It's harder to say, this is how I've been carrying it. Training isn't about being perfect. It's about being honest enough to evolve. And honesty requires courage, because once you see it, you can't unsee it. And once you see your participation in the cycle, you either grow or you defend it. So let me ask you something, and be honest with yourself. Are you growing or are you defending? Confronting the narrative. Healing doesn't stop at ownership. It doesn't stop at responsibility. Step 3, confrontation. And I don't mean yelling. I mean challenging the story you've been telling yourself. When abandonment gets triggered in me, I don't explode. I go cold. Or I say something like, if you leave, I'll be fine. It sounds strong, independent, unbothered. But when I really examine that sentence, how much of it was true? 0. None of it. That wasn't confidence. That was preemptive detachment. That was me trying to emotionally exit early so I wouldn't have to feel being left again. That wasn't strength. That was strategy. And strategy built from fear will always isolate you. During their fight, Pain tells Naruto, you cannot understand my pain. That line is isolation. It's the emotional equivalent of slamming the door. But Naruto doesn't respond with sympathy. He responds with confrontation. He asks him, how are you going to bring peace? That question forces something uncomfortable. It forces Pain to examine whether his solution actually aligns with his goal. That's the third step of healing. Question the narrative. Not just what happened, but the conclusion you drew from it. If you were betrayed, did you conclude that people can't be trusted? If you were abandoned, did you conclude that everyone eventually leaves? If you were hurt, did you conclude that emotional distance is safer? Here's a confrontational question for you. Is your current strategy actually bringing you the peace you say you want? Because if your armor is costing you connection, if your detachment is preventing intimacy, if your independence is masking fear, then your solution may be creating the very thing you're trying to avoid. Isolation feels powerful, but it breeds distance, and distance always damages connections. Armor protects you from pain, but it also protects you from intimacy. So I'll ask you what Naruto essentially asked Pain. Is your philosophy producing the future you say you want? Or is it just protecting you from feeling yesterday? That's step 3. And this is where the healing starts, being comfortable, and now we're confronting. The identity test. Pain stopped being Nagato. He renamed himself. He built a new identity around suffering. Pain wasn't just a title. It was a philosophy, a persona, a shield. He didn't just experience trauma, he became it. And that's where this gets personal. I had to ask myself, am I emotionally available or emotionally prepared for exit? Because abandonment plants a belief. Eventually, everyone leaves. And if that belief runs quietly in the background, you start living life defensively. You detach faster, avoid conflict, you rehearse independence, you keep one foot near the door, just in case. Pain didn't just attack villages. He operated through 6 paths. 6 separate bodies, keeping his real self distant and untouchable. His real body hidden, safe, removed. That's what unhealed identity does. It creates versions of you that interact with the world, while the real you stays protected. Distance feels safer, but it's lonely. Cautious love feels controlled, but it doesn't feel free. The identity shift happens quietly. You stop being open and you become guarded. And guarded hearts slowly build walls. Now here's the next step of healing. Integration. Not erasing what happened to you, not pretending you're unaffected, but choosing not to let your wound become your name. Nagato believed pain defined him. Naruto refused that identity for him. And sometimes healing requires you to challenge the version of yourself that trauma constructed. So here's the identity test. Who are you without the wound? If betrayal isn't your personality, if abandonment isn't your operating system, if survival isn't your brand, who are you choosing to be now? Because you can either build an identity around the hurt or you can build one around who you are becoming. Integration means this: the wound is part of your story, but it's not your title. Pain chose to be pain. The question is, are you still introducing yourself to the world through what happened to you or through who you decided to become? That's step 4. And this is where the healing turns into identity work. Now we're not just fixing behavior, we are rebuilding self. Shinra Tensei. When pain uses Shinra Tensei, the Hidden Leaf village is flattened. Buildings collapse, dust fills the air, silence follows impact. One gravitational pulse, and everything's gone. That's what happens when the internal destruction becomes external. When pressure builds long enough, it will release. The question is, how? Pain released it outward, catastrophically. My version wasn't explosive, it was implosive. I didn't level rooms, I withdrew from them. I didn't yell, I numbed. I didn't destroy externally, I collapsed internally. Silence can create craters too. Trust weakens quietly, warmth cools gradually, connection thins subtly. Explosions are very obvious, implosions, not so much. But both leave damage. Different scale, same root. And here's the truth about healing: if you don't consciously release pain, it will unconsciously release itself. In your tone, distance, sarcasm, shutdown, passive aggressiveness, emotional absence. Pain chose devastation, but Naruto chose something else. He felt the rage, he felt the grief, and instead of detonating it, he sat in it. That's the final step before transformation. Release. Not by projection, not by punishment, but by allowing yourself to fully feel what you've been avoiding. Because what you refuse to feel, you will eventually force others to feel. Run that back. What you refuse to feel, you eventually force others to feel. Shinra Tensei was pain's release, but it wasn't healing, it was discharge. Healing release looks different. It looks like honest conversation. It looks like tears you didn't plan to shed. It looks like admitting that hurt more than I let on. It looks like staying in discomfort long enough for it to move through you instead of out of you. So here's the question: are you releasing your pain consciously, or are you waiting until it explodes or implodes on the people closest to you? Because pressure will move. The only thing you can control is the direction. That's step 5. And now we're ready for transformation. The turning point. The turning point isn't dramatic. There was no music, no applause, no cinematic breakthrough. It was a decision. Instead of fleeing, I stayed. Instead of numbing, I spoke. Instead of pretending that I didn't care, I admitted when something triggered me. Not perfectly or eloquently, but honestly. And honesty shifts the energy. When Naruto stands in front of pain and refuses to kill him, that's the shift. After everything pain did, after Shinra Tensei, after the destruction, after the loss, Naruto doesn't retaliate. He pauses, he listens, and he chooses restraint over revenge. That's someone deciding that the cycle ends here. Healing isn't dramatic most of the time. It's not a transformation montage. It's small decisions repeated consistently. Stay, speak, listen, clarify, own it, apologize, try again. Direction matters more than perfection, because restoration doesn't happen in one heroic act. It happens in repeated micro choices. Every time you choose vulnerability over defense, you're repairing something. Every time you choose presence over withdrawal, you're reinforcing something. Every time you admit that hit a nerve instead of pretending that it didn't, you begin repairing parts of you that were exposed. Here's what most people miss: the break isn't the end of the story. The fracture is the invitation, but only if you choose to treat it intentionally. Naruto didn't erase pain's destruction. He confronted it. He sat in it. And then he made a different choice. That's the turning point. Not when the damage happens, but when you decide what to do with it. So here's the question for you: are you still reacting to the crack, or are you ready to repair it? Because what happens next determines whether the break weakens you or reshapes you into something stronger. Now we're stepping into transformation. Kintsugi. There's an ancient Japanese concept called Kintsugi, the art of repairing broken pottery with gold. You don't hide the crack, you highlight it. The break becomes part of the beauty. Kintsugi doesn't restore pottery to its original form, it makes it different, marked, strengthened, unique. Healing doesn't erase your past, it integrates it. After everything that happened, after the invasion, after the destruction, after the ideology built on pain, something different occurs. There's a conversation. Not another attack, not another jutsu. A conversation. Naruto refuses to respond to hatred with hatred. He speaks, he shares his own pain, he challenges the belief that suffering must be spread to create peace, and instead of doubling down, pain listens. That's the shift. For someone who built an identity around control and force, to turn around and reflect and reconsider, that's powerful. Nagato doesn't agree because he was defeated. He agrees because he was confronted with an alternative that actually makes sense. He sees that revenge didn't bring peace, destruction didn't bring understanding, and control didn't eliminate suffering. And in that realization, he chooses to reverse the damage he caused. He accepts Naruto's perspective. He restores the lives he took, even knowing it cost him his own life. That moment is Kintsugi in action. The fracture of his ideology doesn't disappear. It's acknowledged, it's confronted, and then it's repaired through accountability and sacrifice. Kintsugi teaches us something deeper. Your broken beliefs can be reshaped. Your destructive patterns can be corrected. Your past mistakes don't have to define your future, but they do require ownership before restoration. Honor the wound, repair the wound, strengthen the wound. Nagato's acceptance before his death shows us transformation is possible, even after you've been the one who caused so much damage. That's the power of humility. That's the power of choosing growth at the end of the battle. That's Kintsugi. Let me show you what this concept looks like outside of anime. Because healing isn't about talking differently, it's about living differently. And when I started applying ownership, responsibility, confrontation, release, and restoration to my own life, my relationships began to change. My communications changed, my reactions changed, my perspective changed. When you actually do the inner work, people around you can feel it. You stop reacting from old wounds and you start responding from awareness. And that shift creates safety. In the story, transformation happens when understanding replaces retaliation. For me, transformation happened when accountability replaced denial. I had to accept that I wasn't always operating from a healed place. I allowed unresolved pain to influence how I showed up. I allowed fear to shape my decisions. But once I became aware of it, I had a choice. I could defend my patterns, or I can change them. I chose change. I chose to take responsibility for my actions. I chose to stop blaming circumstances and start examining behavior. And that decision changed everything. I'm happily married to the woman of my dreams. We're building a life together, and we're expecting a child. And none of that would have been possible if I kept listening to the pain instead of listening to my inner Naruto. If I kept protecting my ego instead of protecting evolution. If I kept repeating the same cycle instead of interrupting it. Healing isn't theory for me. It's the reason my future looks different than my past. My brokenness, my cracks, the parts of me that were fractured by experience have been sealed with gold. Kintsugi. Not erased, not hidden, but repaired with intention and strength. And because I chose to confront my pain instead of becoming it, those cracks became part of my foundation, not my weakness, my testimony. That's proof of the concept. Talk No Jutsu Challenge. All right, warriors, this is what we train for. This is where the real work happens. If these episodes are hitting you, if something we've broken down today has challenged you, if it exposed something uncomfortable, don't just consume it, engage from the bottom up. Drop a comment with the fracture you're currently working on. Like the video if it helped you see something clearly, Share it with someone who needs to hear this message. And follow if you're committed to growing through pressure. Because this platform isn't about watching transformation. It's about participating in it. Your mission. Think about the cracks in your life, the wounds you try not to talk about, the mistakes you regret, the relationships that broke you, the versions of you that failed. Now ask yourself, what do you usually do with those cracks? Do you hide them? Do you shame them? Do you pretend they never happened? Or do you acknowledge them? Because the concept we've been talking about, Kintsugi, teaches something very powerful. Broken pottery isn't just thrown away. It's repaired with gold. The fracture isn't erased. It's highlighted. So here's your Talk No Jutsu challenge. What crack in your life are you still trying to conceal? What mistakes are you pretending didn't shape you? And more importantly, what would it look like to repair it instead of hide it? Not by making excuses, not by blaming others, but by owning it, by learning from it, by growing through it. Ask yourself, honestly, are you hiding your cracks or are you strengthening them? Because villains hide their fractures. Heroes repair them. And when you choose repair over denial, you turn your pain into gold. That's your challenge. Gratitude. Villains aren't born, they're hurt first. And if we're not careful, we build armor so heavy we forget how to feel. This episode wasn't about pointing fingers. It wasn't about blaming anyone else for the wounds that we carry. It was about ownership. It was about looking at the parts of myself that were shaped by survival and choosing to reshape them through awareness. It was about admitting that some behaviors weren't coming from strength. They were coming from protection. And then deciding to grow beyond them. I'm grateful. Grateful that I didn't stay armored. Grateful I didn't let old pain define my decisions. Grateful I chose presence over avoidance. Grateful I chose healing over reaction. Because healing doesn't happen in hiding. It happens in honesty. It happens in uncomfortable conversations. It happens when you confront your shadow instead of defending it. And today, I stand in gratitude for the process. I stand in gratitude for the pain that forced reflection. I stand in gratitude for the growth that followed accountability. I stand grateful for the woman I get to build my life with. Grateful for the family we are creating. Grateful that my broken pieces didn't destroy me. They redirected me. My cracks aren't erased. They've been repaired. They've been strengthened. They've been filled with gold. That's Kintsugi. That's transformation. That's proof that your past can become part of your power. This is Mindset Talk No Jutsu. And we don't weaponize our wounds. We refine them. We rebuild them. We rise through them. And I'll see you in the next training session. Thanks for tuning in.